Look, it had absolutely nothing to do with us, and it had everything to do with Blanche checking a box so that he can get a promotion. I don't think that we had high expectations going into this meeting. I certainly did not, but I didn't expect to walk out of the meeting feeling the way that we feel right now. It was demoralizing, to say the very least. And I think that Todd Blanche had an opportunity today to throw us some kind of bone, to agree to something, just, if he offered almost anything, I think that we would have been happy that he just offered us something, but he completely talked around questions. He didn't give transparent answers. He didn't give us any promises as far as following up on investigative leads. He had no real answers for the Ghislaine Maxwell transfer, and no real explanation for the improper redactions. What he did say was that he would be open to meeting us again. However, he would be open after we go to the FBI. Survivors have been going to the FBI for 30 years. Right. For 30 years, we've been going to the FBI. And why should we have any confidence in the FBI or the DOJ right now? Again, it felt like more political posturing and using survivors the way that we've been used as political pawns. We're victims of crime. At the end of the day, we're victims of the crime of sex trafficking. And the fact that our Department of Justice will not take that seriously is beyond concerning, not just to us, but should be concerning to Americans all across this country.
It's such an important point, and you're so brave for being here, not only at our table and talking about this something that's so raw that it only happened a few hours ago, but also being so public in a case that is it tugs at the soul of who we are as a country, that so many powerful people were allowed to get away with something so heinous for so long. When someone like Blanche, says, well, you could have gone to the FBI. Earlier this week, the vice president said, well, the big issue about the Epstein cover-up, it was a PR problem. It was a communications problem. We probably promised too much out there, but that's all really it was. As someone who has had to live this heinous nightmare day in and day out, when they view you in such flippant ways as just a bad political story that has to be tucked away, how do you deal with that on a day-to-day basis?
Well, it's obviously very, very difficult to deal with that on an everyday basis. I think that this has always been handled by this administration as a reputational problem instead of prosecuting crimes that were committed against us. And, this is not something new from our administration. It's particularly concerning to us that, Todd Blanche met with senior officials in the Situation Room.
Yes.
That's something that I think that we're not talking enough about. Usually the Situation Room is reserved for acts of war, natural disasters, yet they were in there discussing the Epstein files, and it just makes you pause and wonder why.
And his attraction to the president is because of how he acted in the Situation Room with the express purpose of trying to make the story about the Epstein files better for the president. That's why the president likes him. So thank you for bringing that up.
So much has happened over the last year with the Epstein files, and horrifically so in terms of how you and other victims had your information disclosed to the public in ways that you were re-victimized over and over again, and they still have not done anything to redact and to remedy, which once something's on the internet, it's very hard to pull back, but still they could make an effort. How can Todd Blanche be a contender for Attorney General when he has shown that he lacks basic competency when it comes to overseeing the release of these files and protecting victims?
Well, that's a question for the senators that have to vote, and that's one of so many things that make him a terrible candidate to be the Attorney General. It was total incompetence. Yes, there were hundreds of thousands of documents, but this is, there's software to do these things. There's human eyes. He pulled people from the National Security Division, my old division, other places to do this, and still they made mistakes, and really costly mistakes for the victims. I want to pull on two other threads based on what Liz said that, just from a legal perspective, have really bothered me. He met with Liz and other survivors and victims and said, go talk to the FBI. But when he went down to interview Ghislaine Maxwell, he didn't have an FBI with him. He didn't have prosecutors who had investigated the case with him, who would have been the right people in the right frame of mind, who had the information that they could have asked the pointed questions of Ghislaine Maxwell that anyone who was serious about doing a real investigation would have asked. I mean, I was a prosecutor for a long time. You don't just yourself go and do an interview or with somebody else who doesn't know anything about the investigation. If you are the one who knows the investigation and you have an agent with you, an agent who knows the investigation. So I think, it just shows how he's expecting different things of you than he even was expecting of himself when he went to interview with Ghislaine Maxwell. And the second thing is, in terms of the sort of not answering questions, Liz, this is what yesterday was all about, right? Hyper-technical responses. When he was asked if he would go and meet with victims, he said, I am prohibited from doing so. That is not true. What that means is there is a rule of professional responsibility for lawyers. It's Rule 4.2, which says that if a person is represented by counsel, you can't go direct to the person. You have to go through their attorney. But he didn't say that part, right? And of course he could go through the attorneys and speak to them. And so he did this time and time and time again yesterday. He gave these hyper-technical responses that didn't answer the question.
You have, before we let you go, Liz, you had Danny Bensky, who made a very important point. She noted, we may look like grown adults when you see us now, but we were children, young girls at the time of our abuse. These are the photos of when our innocence, dreams, and lives were stolen. Please take these faces in as you think of us as your own family, daughters, nieces, and sisters. Were you able to convey that to Todd Blanche? Were you able to tell him what you felt, what you thought?
I specifically told him what I thought and what I felt in a very impassioned way. And I explained to him who I was at the time that I met Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein, what my life looked like and what my future looked like. And I also explained to him what actually happened to my life in the aftermath. And I asked him to not think of me as a victim, but to think about what it would be like if his daughter, Sydney, didn't have the opportunities that she deserved to have her dreams. I wish that I felt like that made an impact on him. It didn't feel like it did, but yes, very much so. I conveyed that to him.